Okay, we're in the kitchen today and we're making meatloaf, and it is so, so good. Even if you think you don't like meatloaf, you're going to love this one. Hi, I'm Mary Catherine. Welcome to my table. Today is homemade meatloaf. You may think you're not a meatloaf fan, and I used to think the same thing, but this is the recipe that changed my mind and made me a fan of meatloaf. You're going to want to try it, and your family's going to love it. So a lot of times, I feel like meatloaf is just meat that's not seasoned very well, but this recipe is full of flavor, and it has so much good seasoning in it. It's the perfect blend of seasonings, and it has a combination of ground beef and ground pork. And that pork brings a new level of flavor to it as well. It's really good. So first, we're going to grab our bowl that already has our meat in it. We start with 1.5 pounds of ground beef and 1/2 pound of ground pork. Then we just dump everything else in. We have 1/4 cup of milk. We have about 1 cup of breadcrumbs. We have 2 eggs. And then we're going to add all our seasonings. A tablespoon of salt. Remember, this is 2 whole pounds of meat that you're working with, so you want to have plenty. 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. About 1/2 teaspoon of thyme. And then about 2 tablespoons of parsley. And that's what's in our meatloaf. And like any good meatloaf, the best way to do it is just get your hands in it. I've got clean hands, and we're just going to mix it this way. You can do it with a spoon if you want, but the hands work better for meatloaf. So I'm just going to start mixing. And it doesn't take very long to just get all of this incorporated really well together. You can see it's already starting to come together now. Okay, I'm going to get both hands in now. Keep mixing. Oh, it's really starting to look like meatloaf now, isn't it? I'll make sure we get all this good stuff around the bowl and that it's in our meatloaf. Okay, that looks like it's pretty well mixed. You can see parsley throughout. Those seasonings have spread throughout. So now it's just a matter of putting it on our pan and baking it. And I know a lot of people will bake meatloaf in a loaf pan. And if that's what you like to do, then you can certainly do that with this. I think it does better if you just put it on a sheet pan. You don't want it to sit in all the grease like it would in a loaf pan. It will still sit in some of the grease, but some of the grease is going to spread out while it's baking. And so you won't be sitting in as much of the fat that renders off this meat while it's cooking. So what I do, I'm going to take my bowl over here. I've already kind of got it started to shape. I'm just going to put it in the center of this pan. And I like to shape mine just like this because that's also going to be a great shape for all those wonderful leftover meatloaf sandwiches that you'll have later. And I've got a great recipe for a meatloaf sandwich that takes things to the next level. And I'll do a video on that soon, so be watching for that one too. It's really, really good. Okay, so there you go. We've got it pretty much shaped like we want it to. And we're just going to let it sit on this foil. I do line my pan with foil because it's going to get really yucky underneath the meatloaf. And that just saves my pan from having so much cleanup afterwards. Now that we've got our meatloaf formed and it's on the pan, ready to go in the oven, we're going to make the glaze and put on it before we pop it in. This glaze is really simple, but it's so delicious. You start with about 1/2 cup of ketchup. And if you like to make a little extra glaze, just so people can put a little extra on their slice of meatloaf, go ahead and do that. I probably have a little bit of extra in here, but the recipe calls for about 1/2 cup of ketchup and about 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. And then about a teaspoon of dried mustard. And that's all there is to our glaze. It's really simple, but it just really comes with flavor. I love the addition of the dry mustard to this. It just has such a good tang to it and mixes so well with the ketchup and the brown sugar. Okay, that's starting to look pretty good. Okay, now that we've got our glaze all mixed together and smooth, we're just going to put it on top of the meatloaf. And I just take spoonfuls and just kind of run it across the top. And then I just kind of spread so that it covers most of the outside of our meatloaf. It's going to kind of drip over the edges and cover most of it on the sides as well. And that's just going to give a really yummy glaze to every piece of this meatloaf. All right, and that's all there is to it. Now we're going to put it in the oven, and it needs to bake at 350 for about 60 minutes. So about a whole hour. And that's all there is. So now we just play the waiting game. And while the meatloaf is cooking, you can get your side ingredients done, and then you'll have dinner ready as soon as the meatloaf comes out of the oven. Okay, our meatloaf has just come out of the oven, and it looks so good. All right, our meatloaf is finished, and it's time to give it the taste test. I'm going to go in. I love that end piece, don't you? You get all that good glaze on it, tons of flavor. Yes, this is the recipe that made me love meatloaf. I hope you enjoyed this meatloaf, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Mary Catherine's Table. Thanks so much for joining me today. Comment and let me know if you try it, how your family likes it. I'd love to hear from you. If you like this content and want to see more, hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much for joining me at Mary Catherine's Table today.